Hi everyone, and welcome along to another lovely sunny day in our garden, and we're going to paint something else that we've been growing, which is really cool. So last week you'll remember we had the strawberries and they are just doing so well. We've had bowls and bowls of strawberries, it's been brilliant. But today we're going to paint this. Yep. The globe artichoke, which is Ant's pride and joy. He's been sort of tending to this plant for 2 years now, and we haven't eaten any because we were rather keener on the flowers and things, but I thought it's starting to open up. Let's paint it before it turns into the flower. So have a good look. And if you haven't come across one of these rather remarkable vegetables before, then have a Google as well. One other thing I really want to show you, it's quite amazing. The leaves have been pecked to smithereens by the sparrows, and we think it's something to do with them trying to get some of the insects off the leaves for their lunch. But it's left us with this amazing, rather strange looking leaf. But normally the leaves are these rather large, serrated, pronged leaves. So I'm really looking forward to painting this one. So, oh, there's my rather handsome husband. Hey Ant, do you want to come and say the catchphrase? You can say it into my microphone.
Grab your paints and let's get started.
So before we start painting, we've got some new colours to put in. So in the top palette, a few of you said, yeah, there's no need to have two reds. I had Scarlet Lake and Cadmium Red, but I tend to sort of interchange with them. So I'm going to put Pyrrole Orange in there, which is very pleasing because it's sort of somewhere between orange and red. Now, slightly less pleasing is the fact that I picked out a turquoise and the greens are all down here, aren't they? But we're just going to deal with it. It's going to be okay. We're all right having a green in and amongst the turquoises. And yeah, so deep sap green, in it goes. Fantastic. Now, if you want to know how to empty out a palette well, then all you need to do is head over to my watercolour painting for beginners playlist, where there's a really handy video where I clean up my palette, swap a few colours in and out, and just show you how to sort of wedge out the paint in a nice clean fashion. So it's time for some painting of artichokes. And what I'm going to do with this one is I quite like the idea of doing a few and then doing a little sort of soft focus background of a few more, because the plant we've got in the garden has just got so many on it. So I thought what I'll do, look at this nib, by the way. Oh, that's going to snap off in a second. So I'm going to put in a stem where we're going to have a nice sort of large artichoke shape, so that the curve just shows me where the base of the artichoke is going to go. I'm going to have a few leaves, and we'll have one more there. And then I'll have, the cuff of my jumper keeps on moving my kitchen roll today. I'm going to have one a bit higher up, a bit smaller, and maybe one sort of more down here, coming in front. Just putting in these curved lines for leaves. Now I quite like that as a composition. And now what you could do is you could use masking fluid if you wanted, but we don't necessarily need to mask these things off, because the background I'm going to create, the soft focus background, is going to end up being quite nice and pale anyway. So I'm going to, it's a hot day today, so I'm trying to work out the order in which I do things. I think first off, let's just wake up some colours. So I'm going to take a nice large sort of size 8 pointed round brush, and I'm just going to wake up, oh look at this, my deep sap green. Get a bit of that in there. The orange was so strong, it slightly stained the palette from last week. Get a little bit of burnt sienna woken up, bit of moon glow, I topped that up as well. Paynes Grey also topped up. We had a little palette refresh, which was rather useful. And then some slightly lighter shades, I'll get the green gold in there. It's interesting how some colours sit in the palette sort of rather crispily, and it's sort of not sitting down in the palette, the green gold, whereas others very happily just sort of sink into their space. And then I think also buff titanium is going to be really useful for this. Last off, I want to just have the cobalt blue deep, a little bit of a sky blue to hand as well. Okay, I'm going to get a clean water jar. Here we go. And I am going to use my large size 12 pointed round connoisseur brush from ProArt, but also available on my Etsy shop and website. And I'm going to paint sort of around the artichoke globes, the flowers. I mean, I'm calling them flowers, but they're still in this sort of vegetable bulb phase. So I do apologise for my lingo. You know I'm one to be a little bit haphazard with my terminology for some things, but I'd like to think you know what I'm talking about. So I've just wetted the area and loosely avoided the actual flowers there, flower heads. And now I'm going to start to place in a soft and gentle wash to sort of depict the area around it. I even like the idea of sort of suggesting there are other artichokes in the space, so I'm using green gold for that. And a bit of burnt sienna, Paynes Grey, shadowiness here. Now I'm going to go slightly smaller with my brush, so I've got my size 8. And I'm going to place in these soft focused background leaves and artichoke stems, and I will place in just a tiny bit. Oh, it's not a tiny bit, is it? But this is the joy of seeing this kind of thing in action, actually, is it all sort of lightens as it dries and fades. So what looks quite like mad at the moment becomes quite a lot less mad. Lovely, oh, I like that. So we're going to let that dry, and then we can paint in the actual artichokes, and it's not going to take too long today to let that dry. So that's all dry now, and I've just taped it down to keep it in place, but we're going to start painting in our artichokes. So I've got my green gold. That's going to be a really important colour for this. By the way, if you are wondering, like, if you don't have deep sap green, then you could just add a bit of Paynes Grey to your regular sap green, and that will give you a really nice deep colour. I'm actually quite interested in getting some cobalt turquoise involved here because I just think it'll take my green gold into a just slightly fresher mode, so I'm pleased with that. Get some deep sap green there. Usually when I'm painting any kind of plant, it's just all about making sure I've got options. So there's my regular sap green. And then there is a hint of purple or sort of burgundy knocking around in these artichokes. So I think alizarin crimson is worth waking up as well, and moon glow. Yeah, I think those colours will be quite good together. Right, we've got all our colours going. Let's paint. It's my first time painting these, so I'm just sort of working it out as I go. I mean, they're sort of tons of little layers. It reminds me of when I was painting the Protea for New Botanical Painting years ago. It was the first flower I chose to paint in the book, and it was so difficult. I kept doing it over and over again. And it just reminds me of all those layers. So I think what I'm going to do is actually just start sort of somewhere in the middle with a sort of fairly sort of light coloured, sort of dilute-ish little, I'm going to call them petals for sake of a better word. And I'm going to just, you've got to imagine everything growing up out of that central stem, and I'm sort of just going across the middle really of this plant using my size 2 brush. And just sort of stopping short, quite pale. And then we'll get to the outer edges. And this is the first sort of example of how that nice, quite sort of lightish wash we had on the background is really nicely done. So I'm just going to add a few little streaks of one of my deeper green colours. So I've got deep sap green here. Just using my 4/10 brush, just from the tip down, whilst it's still a bit damp. That's really nice. Now, I think I sort of feel like the sensible thing, and I don't always go for the sensible thing, as you know. I'm going to repeat that step on all 3 of my artichokes to give them time to dry before we move on to the next stage. And you will find, if you are lucky enough to sort of have a look at a real life plant, that they might all be in slightly different stages of growth and unfurling. So the size of your petals might be a little different. So I allowed that one to dry and put in the next layer of petals, so I'll demonstrate how I did that here. So we've got this nice sort of brick-like effect where you're going in the gaps of the previous ones. And the best thing is to start with the outline of the top with your colour, then clean off your brush a bit, and then use the wet bristles to draw those colours down into the space below. And then if it's dried in a little bit, maybe just a little bit of darker colour to get both the, sort of define the shape a little bit and get the tip and the darker recess. And I'm using my size 0 brush now, because that's much better for control. So we're gradually getting closer to the top, but what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to draw our attention back down to underneath to paint in these sepals or petals at the base of the piece. So you can see I'm using quite a slightly sort of strong bit of colour, but saying that I'm still using my watery brush to just draw the colour inwards, and I'm just going to bring it down in to the centre there. I'm really enjoying being able to paint things for you that are actually in our garden and growing. It's so cool to be able to do it. And I'm going to just keep trying to find interesting things, which means we've got to keep growing stuff. But yeah, so we're going to just bring in the base of all our plants now, because I'm just going to leave this till the very end. We're going to get our stems in as well, so that these stems are lovely and thick and quite textured, so we're going to paint them in a series of thin lines like that, just following on from the pencil line as our guide. And you can see I'm doing it in stages, and that's absolutely fine. But those little streaks of unpainted space make for really good texture lines on the piece. And I'm just going to take a little bit of the deep sap green, get a bit of that in there, just whilst it's still a little bit damp. And then I'm going to take a larger brush, I think a size 4 will be good. And I think I'll get a bit more of my sap green in here. And I'm going to paint in a leaf like that and another like that. However, there's lots of texture on these leaves, even if the birds haven't sort of gone for them. So I'm taking deep sap green, and whilst it's still wet, so you have to move sort of fairly swiftly. And just add it on whilst it's still damp enough to take on the shape. And that's a really fun and satisfying process. So let's do another one. Also just sort of smooth that into the plant. So the sap green I'm taking is quite concentrated, even though it is quite wet. There we go. Lovely. So we'll add the bases and get our stems and leaves on. I want to just get you in for this last leaf because it is one of the larger ones I want to do. And you do find that these sort of serrated edge leaves do turn into these slightly more pronounced pronged leaves. So I just added those sort of wings on, and then still getting that lovely wobble. Okay, so I'm just going to give that a moment to dry before I put in the tops, just so I don't stick my hand in any wet paint, and then we'll be done. And you can see how the background just works so nicely. Those artichokes in the background are really faint and don't show up a huge amount, but they just support the piece as a whole. The final part, so in at the top, what I've done up here is I've painted in some dilute green, same colour, green and so green, gold and cobalt turquoise, that's what I'm saying, with my size 0 brush, and they're really sort of closing in. But we've also got this sort of sense that we can see the other side now. So I'm just filling in those little curves of the other sides. So you can't see sort of a huge amount at this point, but then with this one, what I can do now, in fact I might even go down a size with my brush, because I'm going to paint now the sort of inside, the underside of the sort of curved over petals that are, yeah, like I say, on the other side. It's interesting having this deep sap green. It's stopping me using Paynes Grey quite so much, which, I mean, obviously you know how much I love Paynes Grey, so I will always have it in my palette as a very important colour, but it's just really nice to have other options to go for. And then I might just add in another little one just there. Just trying to make sure I've got this nice shape still really closing in, and then we definitely want a few little texture lines just to help us sort of see where things are going. We're going to add in a few more texture lines anyway, because we haven't even touched that purpley colour that I've mixed up. But there you go. And so up here now, this might be dry. I don't know. Maybe let's do this one and then we'll come back to that and put in the detail. Okay, so with some deep green, deep sap green on my brush, so little bits on the insides of the far side leaves, and then more dilute streaks just on the backs of the ones we can see. yeah, I'm just sort of waiting. But whilst I sort of wait for those to finish, what I can do now is just take some sort of more concentrated sap green, deep sap green, and just give some of these sepals down there a little bit extra, and finally get our Moonglow alizarin crimson colour in. And so you sort of see this when the flower this starts to turn into the flower, you see this colour more and more sort of down in the centre. But what I noticed is you also see it just subtly running up and down some of the outer sections as well. And this can be really good if you've struggled to define those outer edges. So I'm just using my 4/10 brush for this. So I'm just going to add a little bit of the alizarin crimson mix just up here. And I am absolutely thrilled with this. And what we can do when the flower has opened and transformed the plant, we can come back and paint it in that form as well, which will be really cool. Now there's one thing that sap green, deep sap green cannot do, and that's my beloved bit of shadows in at the end. So I'm going to just swap my water over once again. Let's get some good old Paynes Grey. I've got a new bit, so it's all a bit of a big blob up there. Start with a size 2 brush. So I'm just going to bring it round. Sweep it down under. And remember, just like how that wash, the background wash at the beginning dries a lot lighter, so does the shadow mix. So I'm painting it in, sort of following the line of the things that I am coating in shadow. It's funny, you always think, oh yeah, I'm done. But actually, if you chuck in that little bit of extra deep darkness on the piece just at the end, you just find a new level for your watercolour, which is always really nice. And there we have our artichoke. So thank you so much for watching. Do comment to let me know how you got on with that one. And of course, liking the video and subscribing to the channel is so brilliant for supporting us. If you love what we do, then you know that makes all the difference. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time. Bye!